Recording now.
Yes. Okay. Welcome to First Person, a conversation about websites and the disability experience. I'm your moderator, Deborah Kaplan, Deputy Director for Programmatic Access at the San Francisco Mayor's Office on Disability. This webinar is sponsored by the Mayor's Office on Disability, and we're so happy that you're here. We have a fantastic lineup of people with disabilities talking about their experiences with websites and digital technology. And we'll move to the next slide. First, we'll go through a few tips for people who may not have that much experience with Zoom. Your viewing options, you've got a few choices. On the upper right-hand corner, you can select View and get either the speaker view, which focuses on the person who's speaking, or Gallery, in which you can see all of the participants on this webinar. And you can also see side by side. We will be showing slides during this webinar, and when we are showing slides, there are view options. There's a menu to view options at the top of the screen, and you can adjust the zoom ratio and other features. Also, during the PowerPoint slides, you can use the slider between the shared screen and the participants to slide and make either the view of the participants bigger or the view of the PowerPoint slides bigger. Next slide, please. There also are auto captions available for you during this session. You can turn captions on by selecting the CC icon on the bottom menu bar. You can change the size of the captions by selecting the up arrow next to the CC and choose caption settings. You can increase the chat display size in caption settings menu. You can move captions by hovering over the captions and dragging them to the location that you prefer. And you can turn off captions by selecting the CC icon to hide them on the menu bar. Next slide. If you have other accommodation requests during this webinar, please send an email to mod@sfgov.org. And that's also if you have any technical support needs. And this webinar is being recorded, and we will give you a link at the end of the webinar for where the digital archive of the recording can be found. Next slide, please. So today we've got 3 presenters for you: Christina Daniels, Fiona Hinsey, and Destiny Watkins. I'm not doing any kind of introduction or description of our panelists because they are going to be introducing themselves, as you will see in just a minute. Next slide, please. This webinar will be a question and answer mode. And these are the questions on the screen, which I will read, that we will be going through and asking the panelists to answer these questions. First, We're asking them to introduce themselves. Where are you from? What do you do? How do you like to spend your time? Just who are you? The second question, what is your personal story with technology? When did you start using it? What modes do you prefer? What do you rely on technology for? And what assistive technology do you use, if any? Third, what barriers do you encounter that are related to your disability? Describe how they occur. What is your experience of it? What is the impact on you when you face a barrier? Fourth, what is an example of good web design from your user perspective? What aspects of web functionality make you happy? And then fifth, what can web designers, managers, and developers do to understand accessibility better? How can they learn more about the user perspective? So we will launch into the first question with the next slide. So again, please introduce yourself. Where are you from? What do you do? How do you like to spend your time? And Christina Daniels, with the last name starting with D, will go first.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Christina. I am a Bay Area native. I live in the East Bay now, out in Pleasant Hill. I work at the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco, not too far, and from City Hall and MOD. And I work in the communications department, so lots of writing, social media, promotion, all of that stuff. And, things I love to do, I love to sing, I love musicals, I love technology, I like reading, I like writing. So it's great to meet all of you.
Thank you. Fiona, will you go next, please?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Global Accessibility Day. It's really nice to be in conversation with everybody and our fellow panelists. I am a description of myself real quick. I'm a wheelchair user with short brown hair, and I'm wearing a red sweatshirt today. To answer the questions, I'm the director of public policy at Independent Living Resource Center, which is also like Lighthouse and Disability Rights and Service Organization, and I oversee our public policy section. I am a wheelchair user with cerebral palsy, and I'll get into how that affects my use of technology in the next few questions. Things I like to do other than work. I'm a big sports fan, baseball, basketball, football, so I like to watch sports. I also like reading, writing, hanging out with friends and family. So yeah.
Hello everyone, my name's
Thank you. Yes,
Destiny.
Destiny, please.
I would like to say I am from Coastal, Idaho. I am a full-time wheelchair user, and I'm also a single mom of a new baby, and I enjoy spending my time advocating and taking care of my son, and bringing awareness of some of the obstacles I've occurred growing up as a person with multiple disabilities. I grew up in our system, and it kind of was horrible, and so I kind of want to make a change. So I spend a lot of my time advocating, being on panelists, advisory boards, just advocating for things that I see there's concerns and issues with our city. And I also enjoy spending time with my cat and playing video games when I have some free time.
Thank you very much. So we'll go on to question 2. Next slide. What is your personal story with technology? When did you start using it? What modes do you prefer? What do you rely on technology for? What assistive technology do you use, if any? Christina.
All right. So I was born with congenital cataracts and I have glaucoma. I am legally blind. Now, when I was younger, I've always had a visual impairment, but I didn't become legally blind until I was in adolescence. But I'm in that generation that just started to have computers, at their school in their classrooms in the 1980s. So I, got familiar with computers from a very young age. And, we had one in the classroom. And at that time, I did not need any adaptations to use it. And when I was 12, my mom brought home a computer because sometimes she did things at home, and she told us, when I'm not using it, you can use it. So I basically got to teach myself to use a computer. This was 1992. So I think it was kind of at a time when not everyone had a computer at home quite yet. So I think that kind of gave me a head start, which was really, really beneficial. So, as I got into like the end of middle school, beginning of high school, my vision had changed to the point where I needed to start using accessible technology. So I was using screen magnification. I was using, sometimes I would just make things bigger in Microsoft Word, make the print bigger. I, you know, did this for, quite a while. However, when I got into college, in order to keep up with the college course load, especially as an English major reading, hundreds of pages a week, I started using a screen reader. And so, that, because sometimes my eyes get tired, even if I can make it big enough to see, my eyes can often get tired. So sometimes I use the screen reader just to let my eyes relax. I also use a screen reader. In my job, copy editing is really important. So I use a screen reader to help me proofread, because what it will tell me is I can set it to tell me every piece of punctuation as I'm going through. So as it's reading sentences, it will tell me, okay, yes, that's a colon, that's not a semicolon. Because sometimes when you are someone that's legally blind, your eyes can kind of fill in things, especially if they're tired, and you might miss things visually that you will catch auditorily with that screen reader. So when I proofread, I'll be reading it and listening at the same time, and that helps me catch so many things. So I rely on technology for a lot of things to do my job. Like I said, copy editing is crucial, and I need the magnification and the screen reader to do that. I use it for navigation purposes. If I'm going somewhere unfamiliar, I'll open up the GPS on my phone, and I can either look at it visually, I can turn on the screen reader on my iPhone and listen to it as I navigate. I use it to look up bus schedules. I use it to access things like menus if I'm going into a restaurant. Since I can't read the regular print menu, some places will have their menus online. So I can kind of start looking there. If anywhere has a QR code I can scan, of course, that's great. I use technology for pleasure too. I have a smart TV. So I can turn on, it's an Amazon Fire TV. So I can turn on voice view on that if I want to use that. I use it, to access a lot of apps. I do a lot of games on my computer, on my phone. I have an Amazon Alexa. So I use technology like every day, all the time. And, I love using it. And, I think for me, I prefer screen reader, for things that require really high accuracy. Generally, I use magnification, and I also usually will do what's basically, if you consider it dark mode, which is changing the contrast, because for me, it is easier to see white text on a dark background versus black text on a lighter background.
Thank you. There was a lot of information in that answer. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Fiona.
Thank you. In fact, there was so much information that I can keep my answer brief because I actually have a very um, similar story. So, as I mentioned before, I have cerebral palsy, and for me, there are a couple of things that come from that specifically relate to my use of technology. But in terms of your earlier parts of your question, which is what is my technology story and when did I start using it? I also grew up in school in the 90s. So, and really, um, at the time of 90s technology, a lot of the technology I use now to help me navigate my computer now completely independently didn't exist back then. So I have, as a result of my cerebral palsy, I have dexterity issues. So I can't type quickly. I type only with one finger, so I can type, right? But it's very slow. It's not efficient. And if I'm holding down a job, that speed of typing wouldn't be efficient for me. So back in the day, somebody would always type for me, like my papers and whatnot. Um, I first started using dictation software. Um, Probably I started trying it in middle school. Um, I was not, it wasn't very successful for me because typically when I speak, my speaking pattern is very breathy. So I have to take a lot of breath when I talk. And back in the day when dictation first came out, it still does to some extent today, but it used to really pick up certain breaths to interpret it as like I was trying to say something. So um, in the first iteration of dictation software, it was actually more of a hindrance for me for trying to use it. So I wasn't I didn't use it for a couple years until I really got to college. I also have a visual perception disability that's very common for folks with cerebral palsy to have a visual perceptual sort of disability, which I have, and it means I can't really read quickly, or I read slowly and it's not efficient. So like Christine, I don't need to use a screen reader at all times, but I find it most efficient for me to use one, especially when I'm reading something that is long, and like Christine, something that I need to read or make sure is 100% correct before I send, say, an email or send out a letter I might be writing. But mostly I use a screen reader for if it, mostly I use screen readers and dictation for efficiency's sake. I rely mostly on computers. I do have a smartphone, but because the display is smaller and I also use large print and magnification in a larger font size, I find the display to be easier on computers. However, I do use a smartphone when I have to, and I use some some apps that are screen reader and dictation friendly, but I find computers to be the most effective form of technology for what I need. So what do I use technology for? I use it all the time. I also have a smart smart TV. So and I also have a smart speaker. So I can access things like the radio on my Amazon speaker device. I so yeah. So a lot of things that are similar to Christine, plus the use of dictation software. So
Thank you. Thank you. Destiny.
Hi, so I have a learning disability, and so I grew up in special ed, and I always had somebody help me. But back in the day, like there was very limited support in the special ed room, um, and so it was really hard to gain your independence. And so um, when I got into high school is when I started using and learning more about technology and computers and cell phones and stuff like that. And when I graduated, I started using technology to help me on everyday um, for life skills. So, like reading and writing has been always a struggle for me. So, I would always rely on asking my Google, what is this word? Or how do I spell this word that I can say, but I don't know how to spell it, to help me fill out like paperwork and stuff like that for doctor's appointments, and just anything that I really need help with since I don't always have a caregiver anymore. Like it's really hard to find a caregiver. And so I really rely on my technology to help me. And I always have to make the time to plan for it if I'm going to appointments and stuff because doctor's offices are not always the patient with somebody with a disability. And so I rely on multiple forms of technology support because I'm also a paraplegic. So I rely on a power chair and also I like using my Google speaker to help, me be hands free because I am now also taking care of a child on my own. And sometimes like I also have like the Bluetooth light bulb, so I don't have to sit and struggle with transferring into a dark room and then having to worry about a light switch to be shut off. And so I really like having technology to help support me where I would have to rely on somebody in person to help me. Um, I use all forms of technology like um, the little robot vacs to help clean my apartment, or um, I rely on certain like apps for my phone to help me use like out in the community, or if I'm struggling and I'm not at home, I can use my cell phone a lot more to rely on, or a tablet if I need to for documentation, and battery life as well. I always run out of battery because it's hard to find places to charge my stuff, or if I'm sitting in the doctor's office, it's really hard to sit and charge my technology while I'm at all of these appointments once or twice a day. Um, and so technology is a big thing in my life as well. And um, just to gain my independence and to be able to live somewhat of a normal life as a young adult. and a mother. It'll help me be able to teach my child things that I might struggle with, like reading, so relying on screen readers, just because I also struggle with that. So I like to listen and follow along. So that's something that I could see me being able to pass down to my child to help me. And overall, it just impacts my life to be independent.
Thank you. Um, so that was really, really illuminating and fascinating, and we've got more to cover. Let's go on to question number 3. So you've talked a little bit about this, but I think this is obviously a very important question. What barriers do you encounter that are related to your disability? Describe how they occur. What is your experience of it? What is the impact on you when you face a barrier? Christina.
All right. So, in terms of technology, of course, the biggest barrier is when websites are not accessible. And so, speaking first, if we look at a website in terms of color contrast, if a website does not have good color contrast, like let's say if you have light gray text on a white background to where it's very, there's not a real big contrast between that, that's very difficult to see. And that would require me to try to go play with my settings in my accessible technology to try to tweak it to get the website to be legible to me. Those are times when I might need to switch to a screen reader out of necessity, because there's only so much you can do if the colors are not a good contrast. Like think of a color wheel, think of colors that are opposite of each other, black and white, or kind of blue and orange. There are colors that, work better together having text and background than other colors. You don't want a color that's very light on top of a very light color, or a color that's dark on top of a color. So you wouldn't want red text on a black background is not the most ideal, because they're both, pretty dark colors, or as I said, gray text on a white background. So, from the low vision perspective, that's one thing I encounter. Another thing is when you are magnifying a website, you are no longer seeing the entire screen at once. So if a website is not laid out consistently page to page, like, the help menu is always in one spot, the search thing is always in one spot, the menu bar is always, in the same spot. If your web pages on your website don't have a consistent layout, as a low vision person, you have to kind of do more searching, because, you may only see, you're only going to see part of the screen at a time. So you're doing a lot more panning. It's like, wait, on this page, the menu bar was on the left, but now on this page, the menu bar is on the right. What's up with that? So, that's one thing to keep in mind. If there's a more consistent layout from page to page, then somebody using magnification will always know, like, okay, on this website, this is going to be in the upper left-hand corner. So, those are definitely barriers. From the perspective on the screen reader, of course, is when a website either does not read anything with the screen reader, or it reads gibberish because it hasn't been coded properly, or it's missing parts. Like for instance, if you're on a website and let's say you're clicking through and you're reading pages, and then you open up something and it has buttons, like, how sometimes you'll have like a big button to click. If the buttons aren't labeled, right, the screen reader just might read gibberish, or it might just say button, or it may not say anything at all. It just all depends. So things that are unlabeled images. If you have an image that does not have alt text, which basically is, text that describes what's in the image, then that might be, that's difficult. If someone, can't see the image at all, then of course they're not going to know what's in the image. If somebody is low vision, they might see part of the image, but they might miss important things. So, making sure that images have descriptions, that buttons are labeled. Those are big things. When I, face, another big thing, inaccessible PDFs. So sometimes it's always better to have a PDF that is actual text, not a scanned image, because this is a barrier I face. If I need a PDF that's a scanned image, then I will have to try to run OCR on it, which is not always going to decode it accurately. Whereas if the PDF is, text, like actual text versus a scanned image, then I can, I can read it with a screen reader. So that's a big one. Or when people, instead of having the text, they scan images of the text instead of having the actual text in the PDF. That's one of the big barriers. And so, of course, that can slow me down when I'm doing my work. Sometimes if I can't get the OCR to run on it properly, then I will have to go to a colleague who is sighted and, get some help with, getting it decoded, which, I mean, obviously, they're happy to do that, but, I would like to be able to do, things independently on my own. Another thing is when on apps, when they break, sometimes an app will be accessible and then there will be an update and suddenly the accessibility has been broken on it because nobody tested that. They just updated it and didn't, run through all the tests of the various disabilities with it. So those are all, things I encounter. And so of course it means I either have to find an alternative way to do it, which takes longer. I have to ask for help, or, I just have to kind of slog through it to try, to get it done. So those are, some of the barriers that I face.
Thank you. Fiona.
I would say, and I'll skip the most of the screen reader barriers since Christina did such a great job of covering those and the low vision barriers. See, this is why it's great to be on a panel with such esteemed and articulate colleagues. But I will add for some of the dictation pieces is sort of similar to what Christina was saying about the importance of accessible websites. That also means that like fillable PDFs I can do with my dictation software. And I did use Dragon Dictate before. I now just use the built-in dictation feature on the Mac. But making sure that fillable PDFs are also dictation friendly is a barrier that I sometimes face because sometimes fillable PDFs don't work for me, either because of the screen reader or because of the dictation. One of the things that's sort of unique to my situation, and I think a lot of people who use voiceover on maybe the phone might face this, is the interaction between dictation software and a screen reader. It doesn't always work. Now, in my case, because I'm sighted and I can actually see, so the screen reader is mostly for convenience for me and efficiency. I can turn it off, but a lot and do my dictation separately. But one of the problems is that when your screen reader is on, your dictation software will pick that up and assume that because the dictation software is not it's not smart, so it's going to hear whatever it hears and assume that that's something you're typing. So you do, if you have them running both at the same time, it can be really disconcerting, and you do have to sort of look to see that what your dictation software is picking up is actually what you're trying to say, which is a huge barrier for me, and something that I always have to be really conscious of, and making sure my screen reader is off when I dictate because of that. So I would second everything that Christina said and add that whole interaction between dictation software and screen reading software is something that hopefully, as technology evolves, gets more bearable. Because yeah.
Thank you. And a question for both of you. Does either of you use a mouse, or do you need to tab on the keyboard?
I
I use a mouse.
Okay.
I do use a mouse. I do use a lot of keyboard shortcuts too, because they
Yeah.
do save time. So
Yeah.
I use both.
Okay, thank you. And Destiny, please. Question 3.
So I would have to say I use screen readers, but I also I wasn't offered a lot of support with like technology. I just kind of had to figure it out and how best to help myself. And so I had to like teach myself how to use a computer and screen readers and certain softwares I had to find off of the internet. And sometimes the struggles I find is websites that have like layouts of like, oh, you can click this highlighted area, but I wouldn't know that that's an actual button to click. It's just highlighted in a color with font. And so sometimes it was always hard for me to identify that I could click that and it would open up a tab or it would take me to another page. And so using a screen reader, sometimes that's really hard to identify on a website. But also I use glasses because I do struggle with my vision. And so I have to blow up my font as well. And with that being said, like when you're searching through the website, it's really hard to find a chat box if you have any like issues of using it or navigating it. And sometimes like I can type and stuff like that, but because of my learning disability, I struggle where chat boxes are like, if you don't type in a certain amount of time, they'll close out your chat. And that's always been an obstacle for me. And sometimes like chats don't give a button where you can talk to text. So that makes it really hard for me to navigate websites. And I always have to ask somebody to help me, or I have to like pre-type out what I'm gonna say and then copy and paste it. Just so I can get something accomplished. And that's a lot of time consuming and it gets frustrating sometimes. So I try just not to put myself in situations because of how unsupportive certain websites are or programs. And so trying new things are always hard to do when you have multiple disabilities, just because it's just going to be an obstacle all the time unless like people bring awareness of how they've improved their website and how user friendly it can be. And also to answer the question, I use a mouse and my keyboard, but I also like to use talk to text. So I like to use like my Google speaker to help me do things, or like on my phone I'll just talk to my phone and it will have that accessibility to open up something for me just if my hands are busy, or I have a muscle condition, so sometimes it's hard for me to use a mouse or a keyboard sometimes. So yeah.
Thank you. Um, I just love the amount of information that all of you are so generously providing. I really appreciate it. Let's go on to the next slide. Question 4. What is an example of good web design from your user perspective? What aspects of web functionality make you happy? Christina.
All right. So I kind of alluded to some of this in my last answer, but some big things that make me very happy and are great are, good color contrast, absolutely. Labeled images, menus that, are easy to navigate, that are, in consistent places, that, have a consistent layout from page to page. So, your menus from, page to page on your website should all, be laid out the same, because that, having that consistency is really great, especially, as I said, when you are blowing up your screen and magnifying, you're only seeing, a quadrant of it or something like that. I also love, as I said, accessible PDFs. If you've got PDFs that are text, I think anything that, oh yes, headings. Headings are a big thing. So, what I mean, of course, by that is, let's say you have a page, you've got an article on it, and it's got subsections, giving headings and having different levels for your subsections. What that does, if you have headings and people can navigate through people can use their screen readers to easily navigate to the different sections. If you are scrolling something visually, you can kind of like scroll down, like, and see the bold text and like, okay, this is what I want. But if you're not using a website visually, having, headings labeled in screen readers are built-in commands that allow you to jump around in headings. Also, another big thing are what are called descriptive links. So sometimes screen reader users bring up a list of links because maybe they're looking for a specific link. Maybe they're on Amazon and they're looking for the order link, or they're looking for the search box, or looking for help or something like that. It's not good to have a link that says click here and that's it. Now, if it says something like click here to go to the MOD website, so you want something that's descriptive, that is telling you what the link is, and not just click here or go here, because a lot of times screen reader users are not, they're not always just, reading a website, from top to bottom, left to right, because, some websites have a massive amount of links. And, sometimes, someone visually can just spot something, like they're like, oh, that's what I want. And the equivalent of that with the screen reader would be to perhaps bring up a list of headings and jump to a section, or bring up a list of links. So descriptive links are also important. So those are all things that make me really happy.
Thank you very much. Fiona, what makes you happy?
I think to add to what Christina was saying, I'll be really specific. I think one thing that would make me happy, now I can see images, but one thing that makes me happy is really good alt text in really good descriptors of the images of what is on an image, particularly if it's a map, because I have some visual perceptual issues that really, like, within websites, where my visual impairment really comes out is with really complicated graphics and maps. So good descriptions of those really make me happy. And I think I do just want to highlight what Christina said about, if a screen reader user is going to a website looking for for a specific say kernel of information, it's really hard for them to find that, because that often requires them to navigate through a whole lot of other information that they might not need or might not be relevant to them. So I think also that's really good, also really good text only versions of websites. Those can be really helpful if they're done correctly, and really consistent page layouts can also be really helpful. So yeah.
Thank you. Destiny, please.
Okay, so I would say, what makes me happy with good websites is when things flow as if you're like reading a book instead of it jumping all around like with some of the screen reading that I use and the options I use are different than what maybe a person with a different disability screen reader might be different. So um, it kind of will jump from one part of the conversation to the next part instead of following that same box. And then it kind of like confuses me what the content is because it's like giving me two boxes all at once instead of the first section and then the second section, just because of how the website's all laid out. And so that has always been an obstacle, but to find out like having accessible like here on Zoom, it has been really amazing to see that, we have that the captions available and that kind of stuff to help people. And cart has been a really good one as well. I also like how some websites will have the option to talk to somebody and have them explain things to you instead of you sitting there trying to figure it out if no one's available. And like I know on Amazon they have like they'll call you option if you click it. So that's always helpful instead of me trying to sit there and navigate how to do things. And so having that auditory option is very helpful for me, along with uh, things to stay more organized instead of split up on a website. Uh,
Thank you very much. And so next slide, please. We'll wrap it up with this question and hopefully we'll have some time for questions or comments. So maybe just I'll ask you, is there one thing that you think web designers, managers, and developers can do to understand accessibility from the user perspective? Christina.
Reach out to those users, have them do user testing and give their feedback to you. There's nothing that will give you more than getting the feedback from the people that actually have that lived experience.
Thank you. Fiona.
That was also gonna be
Okay.
my answer. So, and Lighthouse has really good testing infrastructure. So yeah, just a plug for Lighthouse.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad you're doing it. So thank you, Fiona.
Okay. Destiny, what would you say?
I would have to say, make sure somebody from different disabilities trial out some of your testing because every disability is different and so they might have a different perspective. And also like be knowledgeable of, the environment that they might use the website or the program of what they're doing. So like some people that may need auditory, but they're out in the community, it could be disruptive. So make sure that there's like a headphone jack so they can listen to it on their headphones and be able to communicate properly into their technology so it's not disruptive to others. And also just like test your stuff out and bring awareness of what the issues might be because if you don't speak up, it won't get addressed. And that's something I've always learned. If there's an issue, say something because you never know, you might not be the only person. And so don't just stop when someone ignores you. always advocate for better access.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we've got a few minutes left. And let's go to the next slide, please. So there are two ways that we'd like to offer for people to either ask questions or make comments. One, you can raise your hand to be recognized, and we will allow you to talk and raise your question or comment. And then you also can put it into the Q&A feature by clicking on the Q&A icon on the bottom of the screen. And we've already got a few in the Q&A. And so I will read the first question. I'm curious if panelists have any thoughts or feedback on interacting with data products, such as dashboards, interactive reports, tables on public or city websites. What works well, not well, and thank you for this great information. So Christina, would you like to answer that question first?
All right. I don't work with a lot of data products on city websites, but we certainly have, dashboards and interactive tables that, we have done in within Lighthouse. And, I would say what works well, of course, is, as I've said before, having things that, are labeled in a way that they're easy to navigate, having things that work well, in my case with the screen reader. We have at the Lighthouse, we have sometimes, reached out to things like Salesforce. We use that for a lot of things here. And, had somebody come in and, had, people who are accessible, our access technology department tested and make sure it's working with the screen reader. Because sometimes these data products and things get into sometimes kind of third-party proprietary programs. And so then it becomes really important to do that accessibility testing to make sure that accessibility is working.
Thank you. Fiona, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just weigh in quickly here because I do use a lot of the city data products through the MTA. And for ours, we they typically have also a accessible version of like a very graphic data product. So I typically use that because, as I said, my visual disability really comes out when it comes to graphics. So I typically have to use the one with the chart with no, like, the text only version or the number only version. And it does I can use it, it works fine typically, but it takes a long time. It's kind of a version of what I was saying earlier with the website and trying to find the kernel of information. I can do it, but it takes a long time. So yeah.
Thank you. And Destiny, did you have anything to add on this question?
So I would have to say, like, using Microsoft Excel for like entering data sometimes can be difficult when you use a screen reader or voice to text. It gets really confused because of all the grids and how small they are. So sometimes having like a simple format with not a lot of boxes, but maybe having the option to add to the boxes to help enter in data, just because it gets really time consuming, it gets really confusing and chaotic when doing like budgeting or, just that kind of stuff, making like timesheets or, you break down a lot of different steps for like, I don't know if a lot of people have seen like caregiving formats So how it breaks down each task, and then you have to like calculate, what you've done, and those forms can get really confusing making because there's a lot of boxes and different size boxes. So it cuts off content. Sometimes it just gets really confusing. So making them, a standard size and maybe less boxes, but easier to add to that table of content. So it makes it easier to use your screen readers or voice to text.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question, and so I'll read the next one. I'd love to learn more about what makes alt text most useful for images. And Christina, we'll start with you again.
All right. I think what makes it most useful is that it tells you what's going on in the image. I think having description is good. I think, having things that are kind of important to what the image is about. If, let's say the image is about, kids playing with accessible toys, maybe, just quickly describing some of the toys instead of just saying, child plays with, accessible toy, like say child plays with, talking robot or something, right? Also, I think it's kind of cool if you can, sometimes you just have alt text for a logo, but if you can describe the logo so people kind of know, like, what is the logo? Like, so, I've started trying, in my work, to describe logos more. Like, I've gone and looked up, like, for instance, the city of San Francisco seal with like, like the falcon or whatever it is, and like that seal, and like the miner, and I think a sailor or something like that. But like, there's a whole, it's kind of interesting. If you have ever looked at the alt text for the city of San Francisco seal, there's a lot going on in that seal. So, these things I think help just kind of, to use a phrase, paint a picture of what's going on, and it adds to, the storytelling. And my job is writing, and it adds to the storytelling, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a story. It can be, something more technical, but it kind of helps you understand the concepts better, whether you're describing a map or you're describing like an image with a person in.
Thank you. Fiona or Destiny, either one of you have anything to add on that one?
I would just add quickly that if there's something about the image that is set, if there's something about how the image looks that is essential to the context of like the news story or the blog post or the whatever, it's important to just describe that aspect of the image. But it's also just as important to, as Christina was saying, just to just sort of paint the picture of what's going on, and just, yeah.
Thank you. Destiny?
I would have to go along with what they were saying is, with painting a picture, also keep in mind some people use plain simple photos. Sometimes that's hard for people that are visual learners with a learning disability. So I do auditory and visual. And so when I look at an image and it's just plain, it's really hard for me to understand content with the image. So it's also good to have that details in the image. So when you're doing like having that content read more detailed, it's easier for me to understand what's going on in that the picture of whatever I'm doing. That could be a form, it could be, a form with writing and a picture. It has a lot of material and it gets somewhat overwhelming for people with disabilities. And so just making sure you're very detailed in certain settings, like with images, that way either format of either learning can understand what's going on instead of like only getting half of what they're reading or looking at to understand what's going on.
Thank you. Okay, unfortunately, we don't have time for all the questions. but I will carry them forward to our panelists and see if we can get back to those of you who have put questions in the Q&A with answers. And so I'll ask our staff to make sure that we save the Q&A. Okay, well, we are at the hour, and next slide, please. The archive of this webinar will be posted at MOD's website, and I'll read the whole URL for people who can't see it. https://SF, or is that a forward slash? I always get confused. / the regular slash, sf.gov/departments/mayors-office-disability. And we'd like to thank you. You can go to that MOD website for information about accessibility and the ADA. I should have put this on this slide, but if you are interested in San Francisco's digital accessibility and inclusion standard, you can just Google that, San Francisco Digital Accessibility and Inclusion Standard, and learn about what the city of and county of San Francisco is doing to make sure that our websites and IT are accessible. And I also highly recommend the website of the Web Accessibility Initiative of the World Wide Web Consortium. And for that, again, it's the Web Accessibility Initiative of the World Wide Web Consortium. So thank you for spending your hour with us. We're really appreciative of your interest in this topic, and we hope that your websites are always accessible. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one. There should be like just a red button that says like end meeting for all or something.
Yeah.